Welcome to TM 101, where we continue to keep the conversation fluid on all things tour management. Today we are on episode number 43, and we are going to be talking about the world of an agent. And I'm going to pass that over to Henry, and we will get everything kicked off and get this going.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everyone, to TM 101. Today's class is Agent 101, and we have the CAA powerhouse duo from two ends of the globe. Joining us from London is Miss Emma Banks. She's a music agent and co-head of CAA's London office. She represents many of the world's leading musicians, including Katy Perry, Muse, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Florence and the Machine, and many, many others. Also joining us from Los Angeles is Marlene Tsuchii. She's an agent and co-head of international touring and represents many of the world's leading artists such as Ariana Grande, Beck, and Daft Punk. She's also been the guiding force in CAA's international comedy touring, working with comedians such as Trevor and Gabriel Iglasias. So we couldn't think of a pair more overqualified to teach an Agent 101 course. So thank you both for being here. It means a lot to us.
So Emma, let's start with you. How did you get your start in the business?
I did a food science degree at university, the clear and obvious way to get into the music business. While I was there, I started promoting shows, managing a band, doing a bit of everything. And I loved it. It wasn't meant to be what I was going to do, but I really enjoyed the mix, I think, of art and commerce. This is back, I think it's my 30-year anniversary, actually in probably about 2 weeks' time. And so when I started, there wasn't the internet, there weren't mobile phones. It was harder to do everything, but it was easier to do everything and not everybody see what you were up to. So I was making posters with Letraset and a photocopier. I was making the sandwiches on the rider and literally sold tickets, made the sandwiches. I was the girl, I had to make the sandwiches apparently. And then was sweeping up afterwards. The room that we used for our dressing room was the creche for the mature students. So you had to try and get rid of the stench of beer and wine by 8 a.m. the next morning so that the little 3-year-old darlings didn't gag or vomit. So that's really how I started getting into music. And then when it came to job time, I wrote a lot of letters on a typewriter because that's what you had to do. Sent my resume out, my CV to loads of people. Didn't want to be an agent because I thought they were all absolute scumbag fools. No one else wanted to employ me, so decided I definitely wanted to be an agent because I could be a scumbag fool along with them. And Ian Flukes at Wasted Talent got my details and obviously thought it would be a bit of a laugh to employ a woman. So that's really what happened. He gave me a job. I'd started about a month after Mike Greek started at Wasted Talent and pretty much got given a desk, was chucked a book of addresses and phone numbers of venues and asked to start booking a band. That's what I did.
And did you have any training or anything in that besides what you talked about? You had nothing else besides?
Not really. I when I look at some of those routings, I question whether I had a map. Never mind any training. So no, I mean we worked in an open plan office, and Keith Nesbitt was there, Bob Gold was there at the start, and Paul Wilson also, along with Ian Flukes had his own office, so he didn't hear what we were doing, and the rest of us were all in one room together. So I think we learned from, myself and Mike learned from listening to what everyone else was doing. But there wasn't a training program. It wasn't, going and getting a university degree or a college course. It was on the job training.
And what early bands did you work with?
Really early on, I worked with the Lilac Time and Emotional Fish, Fatima Mansions, and pretty early on, Ian got me involved in artists that he was working with. So, I was involved with U2 about a year into my career, which was incredible. Live were an artist that Ian signed. He had a label with Gary Kurfirst, and they got signed to the label, and we signed them for agency. And so they're an act that I've worked with since the beginning of their career. It's been fantastic, 30 years of working with them. So those are some of them. Paul Wilson left the company 6 months after I started, and I started getting involved with some of the acts that he'd worked with. So Texas, for example, who, still sell out arenas and, big theaters, ballrooms around all of Europe. So that's really where I started.
Okay. So Marlene, over to you. How did you get your start in the business?
Well, I started a long time ago when there was no such thing as a music industry degree. I didn't even know being an agent was a job. I was just a music fanatic. I'm classically trained. I went to UCLA and the Royal College of Music and studied and thought, well, what am I going to do when I get out? So I took a job at Reebok and worked for the VP there. Luckily, he's a music fan, or was a music fanatic, and so we sponsored the Amnesty International tour. Somebody had to go out on the road around the world with these artists, which included Bruce Springsteen, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Tracy Chapman, and Youssou N'Dour. So he volunteered me, or maybe I volunteered me, and I got to go around the world with these artists. I met John Perenchio from Triad, who said, oh, we're looking for someone with international experience, which of course I had zero. But I said I had plenty of it, and I took a job as an assistant working for Chris Dalston, who eventually, unfortunately, became my husband. But that's who I, trained with. And we got bought by William Morris soon after that, so I became an agent there. And that's sort of how it started a long time ago.
5-1.
Marlene, staying with you for questioning, how does an agent acquire an act?
Ooh, it varies on the level of act. Sometimes if they're a brand new, baby, we find them on SoundCloud, or someone sees them at a venue, or we'll see them at a venue, or someone sends you the music. Of course, it's different when they're more established, and we try not to subscribe to poaching. Sometimes they want to leave an agency because they're not happy for whatever reason, so they come to another agent. So there's a variety of ways, and also depends on the level of, I think, agent that you are. You tend to get more things sent to you, obviously, when you're a senior agent. We have relationships with certain managers who like to have most of their clients with a certain agent or an agency, so we get them that way. So it really kind of varies. There's no one way or one method of getting them. And of course, we try to subscribe to a team mentality at CAA. So we try to sign as teams wherever we can, where we'll have a younger agent, a senior agent, and, we all kind of learn from the symbiosis of that.
And do you, as an agent, focus on one genre of music, or do you try to book everything across the board?
Personally, as far as signing goes, I love so many different kinds of music. I mean, I represent Her, but I also represent the Foo Fighters and Tool, which is straight ahead rock, right? So it varies. As far as being on teams to book, I feel it's important as an agent to book everything. I really think that you shouldn't pigeonhole yourself. You should learn to book, whether it's classical music. I mean, I've booked everything from Sergio Mendes and Donna Summer to obviously my own clients to Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande. So I can do pop. I think that's part of being a really strong agent, is being able to have a wide spectrum. Excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Emma, how do you and Marlene, the way that you get clients is different from when you have younger agents?
I think, as Marlene alluded to, as you have more experience and a little bit more of a profile within the business, people come to you and you may get approached by bigger artists, managers that have an act that maybe wants to make a move, and you've proven yourself. Younger agents at the company, often the younger agents at CAA have actually worked up through the what we call the mail room. So they start maybe as an assistant, At some point, they then go into the mailroom setup, which, you know, over the years has been more set up actually for the movie business. But what it does is it places them in the LA office, which is where the majority of people are for CAA. Not all of them. We've got a lot of offices all over the place. And they then get to meet people from literally every department. So when they come out of that experience, they potentially have somebody that they know in film, someone they know in TV, somebody they know in video games, because CAA as a company, you know, covers so many genres of the business. It's very diverse. They then come back, they do more, you know, assisting, they then start booking, we make them agents. So a lot of the time, they've actually met a lot of managers already, and they are already part of the signing process before they ever have to sign anything themselves. And what we will generally do, as Marlene has said, is look at adding them to a team. So, you know, the US, and both Marlene and I obviously work internationally, but Marlene books clients in the US, which I don't do. You know, the US setup is sort of a little bit of a hybrid sometimes. You've got responsible agents who are not doing as much booking, and then you've got territorial bookers and people that just specialize in festivals or clubs or theaters, whatever it might be. We don't do that internationally. We all book our own clients. But you give people booking responsibility that way. And we bring on, you know, internal signing at CAA is a really key factor to what we do. So if I go back, when I started at Wasted Talent, the band Texas that I referred to earlier were represented by Paul Wilson. Paul then left to go into management, and Ian Fluke nominally took them on, but he wasn't actually doing the work. I was doing the work. You know, fast forward a couple of years, they're not even asking about Ian. I talk to them all the time. I'm their agent. You know, forward on another 25 years, and Bill Gay Morden, who's gone through the training program and is one of the young agents at the company, is now on the team for Texas, and he's leading quite a lot of the booking. I'm copied on everything. I do all the meetings with him, but it gives him an opportunity to book a client that, you know, has sold out the Hydro in Glasgow and sells out Zenith's arenas in France, which if he had to just rely on booking acts he would be able to sign, he'd only be booking club gigs, and you're waiting for that miracle to happen to get bigger. So it gives him a great opportunity to work at a different level, meet more promoters, understand different genres, because as Marlene says, you know, she books everybody from A to Z, as do I. You know, I'll be dealing with Marilyn Manson and Norah Jones in the same day. I think it's really important that you have lots of experiences. So, you know, we want all of our agents to know as many people as possible. And, you know, clearly the younger agents can also go out and meet the younger managers. They've got something in common that, you know, Marlene and I, maybe we can talk to them, but we're not having the same life experience as a 25-year-old.
Yeah, that's,
And
keep going 5-1. I'm sorry.
And do you tend to work with entire rosters of artists from like one management firm, or does it kind of, I guess it's kind of like who you know in networking?
Yeah, a little bit it's who you know. Yeah, there are some management companies that like to just work with one agency. There are others that like to spread it around. You know, I think in the same way that we deal with promoters. You know, of course, we all would like, if you've got a big management company with big artists, you'd like to represent all of them. That's human nature. But I think it's understandable that if you are a big company, you want to spread it around enough so that you see other points of view, but not so much that you have no weight and gravitas with anybody. So I think that's what we do a little bit with promoters. You know, in Europe, I don't only work with one promoter in UK or one promoter in France or one promoter in Australia. But there are promoters I don't work with, and it's not really any reflection on whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. Some of the time it's just, you've got the people that you know and that you need, and you don't have thousands of acts to give out, and you want to have enough push and pull with people, and to be able to use the strength that you have with bigger artists to maybe help younger artists get other points of view, all the rest of it. So, a lot of the time you'll have managers that are particularly keen on an agent, a company, but the artist also has a say in who their agent is. So just because, Peter Mensch does a lot of clients with me doesn't mean that every act that he represents works with Emma Banks or CAA. There might be some that actually want to be somewhere else.
Well, thanks. And then Marlene, this question's for you. If an agent moves to another agency, do the artists usually come with that agent, or what's the dynamics there?
Well, ideally, that's the way people would want it to go, right? If you leave, you want your clients to go with. Me personally, I've been very lucky. I've been with the same clients that I signed many years ago. I've taken them to every agency I worked at. I worked at Artist Direct after William Morris until I came to CAA. So that is ideally the way it should go. But yeah, there's a lot of times where it doesn't go that way, and the artist or the manager are signed more with the agency versus the agent. And in that case, it stays with the agency. It's one of the things I think CAA has been smart about doing because of this team mentality. They've put so many people from different departments into the lives of the client as well as the manager. So it's a little bit trickier, a little bit trickier to move the client sometimes, I think. But ideally, as an agent, it's really important that you maintain a direct relationship with your client. So when things like that happen, or if a manager is let go and there's a different manager or no manager in some cases, your relationship is maintained with the client, and they ultimately want to stay with you because of the loyalty and everything you've built up. So.
Continuing the conversation a bit to expand, starting with Emma, this is kind of a two-part. I'd like to hear both of y'all's points on it. Why do some acts work with multiple agents, agents in different territories? Can y'all touch on that a little bit, and how the flows of that work?
I think so. Sometimes, generally, there'll always be an international agent and a US agent, if we're looking at this from a US perspective. Marlene's actually quite rare that, Beck is a client of hers worldwide. She books everywhere. A lot of people that book international don't book the US and Canada. So there has to be a separation there. Obviously, if you're with one agency globally, then it almost doesn't matter how many people are involved, because you're all part of one big team, and hopefully the idea is you're all talking to each other and you've got an overall plan. I think even though if you're at CAA, the ideal scenario, if you can, is really to have your two primary people, or one in the case of Beck, so that you have as much of a joined up plan. Because in the same way as you don't have a manager for every different market, even though a manager in the UK may say that they know more about what's going on in the UK than your manager in North America does, I think it's about being able to come up with cohesive and coherent plans for people. So you do have some occasions where there's maybe 3 agents, and we're talking about, the responsible agents, not the booking staff that sometimes go along with the bigger agencies. And that's often historically what's happened. There was a point where the Chili Peppers were represented by CAA globally because Don Muller was at CAA. He moved to William Morris, Chili Peppers moved with him. They stayed at CAA for the bits we booked, and they went with Don for the bits that he booked. System of a Down. So, that's one of the things that happens. Tenacious D, which is a client that Don has in North America, Marlene books Asia, South America. I book all of the European stuff. It's just how it's happened, and it's how the manager decided they wanted to do it. And at one point, you know, we're all together. So generally, you sort of have two, and that's it, I would say.
Marlene, do you have anything that you'd like to touch on it? And for any of our students, you know, every agency fluctuates. Some have a worldwide presence and some do not. So it is important to find that kind of cohesiveness, depending on if you do solely just have a North American agency, and then you do look to go international. It is important to kind of keep the team cohesive around that point. Marlene, would you like to touch on that as well?
Yeah, for me, because I do both, the US and international, I've actually tried to instill it into my assistants who've all sat on my desk, whether it was William Morris or at CAA, to try to learn both, because I think it's a great tool when you're signing that you can speak about booking America as well as booking international. So Ron Opaleski, who used to be my assistant, who is at William Morris, who's been able to do that. I mean, you know, I think it's a great signing tool that you can speak to the world, but it's not something everybody can do. So yes, we try really hard to keep as many territories as we can. But as Emma said, you know, there's relationships. Some managers want to have an agent based in London who does all their international. So which is great because we have a London office. Some people have a relationship with an agent that's based here in America, so they'll have them do the whole world, or at least the other side of the world. So it's partially about relationships, partially about preference. But in this new world order, as we move forward, I think it's really important for the younger agents to be global agents and not going back to the being able to book any kind of genre. I just think pigeonholing is not the smartest way to go about things.
Hi, Marlene. Hi, Emma. We didn't chat yesterday, but I have a question on that, just an extension of that question. I'm based in Montreal, and I work with an artist from Montreal who has a separate agent for Quebec province. And quite a few artists that are based here, because the music scene here is almost a microclimate in and of itself. They will have a French-Canadian agent, an English-Canadian agent who will generally do North America, and then a European agent. And, you know, it seems to me that to gain access to the province outside of, you know, Oshiega and Festival d'été de Quebec, if you want to get into the regional areas in the province, having a local agent is beneficial to them. Are there any other territories in the world where that's potentially the case? Or there might be a sub-agent or something to that kind of effect?
I would say to that, I mean, what you find, particularly if you come from a certain place, so lots of Australian artists will have a separate Australian and New Zealand agent, partly because when you start, you know, the idea of having somebody that's 12 hours away on a phone is impossible. You want someone that's closer. And there's many Australian artists that actually never go outside of Australia. So, you know, a tour of Australia to most international people is 5 cities. A tour of Australia to an Australian, you know, to a domestic artist could be 35 cities, and there's still places to go. So I think under those circumstances, you often see a local agent. You know, I think you look at somewhere like France. French agents are also promoters. I mean, the situation there, the whole setup is very different. If you are a domestic French artist, your promoter is really your producer. Labels don't pay tour support. The promoter is paying you money. And so lots of French artists, you know, if we work with a French artist as an international agent, often France is carved out because the French producer / promoter / agent is doing it. But we will then also contract a show with that producer because they've already prepaid the artist. It's a very different kind of deal.
Right.
So, you know, there are horses for courses, and I think we've been talking very generally about probably UK or US based artists that
Sure.
fairly easily fit into that. You know, in Europe, a lot of the promoters are also agents domestically. So,
And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's really interesting for our students to know. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I've dealt with a couple of those before, you know. So that dynamic is really, I think that's really useful, you know, especially for our students to understand. If you're going into shows, that's why you might see a bunch of different names, you know, on deals that are outside of
in
your
France.
agent.
In France, you have a situation where, you know, you have to have one person, one company that does the French tax return for the French tour. So you have local promoters, some in cities, then they funnel through the national promoter producer person, and lots of even the big festivals don't want you to contract directly with them. They will immediately go, you know, Belfort, Hurricane de Belfort, which is a big festival with a booker who speaks perfect English and knows every agent and will have conversations, will, once he's decided he's going to book your act, say, okay, who's your French promoter? Because they will send the offer to the French promoter, and we will then contract to the French promoter, not to the festival, because that's who's dealing with the taxes. It can be quite frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. Wow. So speaking of booking tours, Marlene, when you're booking tours, you don't just open a map and, despite what people may think, you don't just open a map and randomly pick cities and venues. So what elements of a tour do you take into consideration when you're booking a tour?
I actually like a really collaborative effort, and I try to take in as much as I can. Obviously, you have the manager and the client directing what they want or don't want, but I think it's important to incorporate, especially for the bigger tours, whether it's the TM and, you know, they have their own input, the PM who knows a lot about what the production, you know, moves are and all of the logistics. Obviously, there's a label who has their own agenda and things that they need. So I just feel like, particularly on, like I said, the big tours, it's important to have everybody's input. Now, you can't maybe incorporate all of that, but I think it sort of shapes the way it goes and helps you hopefully address all the things that are needed. For a smaller tour, like a club or a theater tour, generally it's a conversation between, you know, the manager and potentially the client. And it's pretty straightforward, right? There aren't that many choices, maybe a couple, but so yeah, it's really about the bigger tours, I think, where, at least for me, I feel like I have to, or I'd like to bring everybody into the conversation so we can maybe offset some problems later where the production's too big, or that person can't sing that many shows in a row, or all the things that come up sometimes after we've already gone on sale, you know, which is a huge nightmare. Like, you know, I can't remember what client it was. We had somebody who suddenly said, oh, we have this thrust that we're putting out. You know, they suddenly decided that. I'm like, well, we already sold tickets in that space. So what are we going to do with those people, right? We had to reassign people seating. So just to prevent that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a tour one time where the deal was done, and then one of the artists went on a special diet, and we had to start carrying catering. So that had to be redone, you know, about a month out. Emma, so what happens if there is not a TM or PM in place when you start booking that you can go to?
We just make it up. I mean, obviously we're talking to management, we're talking to whoever it is that takes decisions. So we'll have a chat and go, what do you think is going to happen? You know, Marlene, myself, you know, our colleagues, we've got lots of experience. And so if it's an act you've worked with before, you know, you probably sort of, your default position is go back to what they did before. You beg to be told if they're going to do something in the round, because that really does alter things. So we try and have a few ground rules, and then we'll just do what we can to the best of our ability. You know, we all know local bus companies, truck companies. So if I'm concerned about a travel day, or I will ring up Beat the Street or Trans Am or whoever, and they go, oh God, what do you want now? And I'll go, please, will you tell me? And they're always, everybody at the trucking and the bus company, they're all so helpful and friendly, because ultimately they know if they don't help us now, they're the ones that are trying to work out how to do a 12-hour journey in 6 hours. It's all, so I think we do that. We try and have a level of common sense to what we do. We hope and pray. And then, I'll just put all of, as you used to get told at school, when if you did a maths exam, you got points for the working out as well as getting the right answer. I work on the fact that if I show the working out, maybe even if the answer's wrong, I at least prove that I tried. But it's hard because we're booking shows further and further in advance, and particularly at the moment. And, sometimes you're booking a tour before the artist has actually made the music that they're going to be touring. They don't have the inspiration. They don't know. They don't want to talk about what the tour's going to look like. They haven't, some artists have the same tour manager and production manager, tour in, tour out, and so we can always have a chat. Others, every tour cycle is new people, and so if they're not employed, you can't talk to them. So I think as an agent, you do your very best. It's all you really can do, and you keep asking, and ultimately we route a tour, we send it to the manager and we go, here's the tour, is this okay? Please talk to the artist about it, make sure that they understand that, this is, on this day and that day. And, and often it's at that point when you've really worked long and hard and you've tried to get the avails that you suddenly get told, oh, sorry, it's their son's 5th birthday. They can't play a show that day, or they've got a wedding and they're going to need to leave for 2 days to come back. They don't want to play on that day. A lot of the time we're routing there. Right now in the UK, there are 3 dates that are not confirmed at Brixton Academy from October to the end of December. You can't get a date. So if you want to do a date there, and if you could clear one of them, you have to route around it. And it might be that the only date in Glasgow is the day before. Now, any agent with half a brain knows that it would make much more sense to maybe, go Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, London. And if we could, we would route it like that. I promise you, we don't get prizes for doing a little star. We're not on a kickback from the diesel company or the trucking company to spend as much money as we possibly can. But we can only use the venue avails that there are. And what's particularly frustrating is I will put money on the fact that if shows start again in London in April, let's say, loads of those availabilities of shows that are confirmed for November at Brixton will disappear because their show will actually play in May and they won't need the date anymore. So as you're explaining to the artist going, but why didn't we play yesterday? Because it was free. You're like, because when we booked it 18 months ago, it wasn't free. That's the shit you have to deal with as an agent as you're trying to get it right. And
how often does it happen? Because I had this situation a few years ago where a tour was fully booked, and it was booked as if it was going to be a full band, and then the artist changed it to solo acoustic. So it was the unicorn tour where everybody was happy because there was no real. It was booked sensibly, no crazy gigantic guarantees, but very sensibly. And then there became no overhead. So everybody was happy. The promoters were happy. The agent was happy. Everything went into huge overages. Does that happen ever does it happen if you're booking without knowing what the tour is, or is it more likely the other scenario where?
I think it's usually the other scenario.
That was my unicorn tour.
Yeah.
But let's not forget you're also up against sports, right? Like that's a huge
there's
component.
sports goals, particularly here in America when you want to hold the arenas.
Yeah.
we're always waiting to see what happens with the sports schedules. And now it's even worse because of COVID and everything getting pushed back. So yeah, the game of trying to hold dates en route is a nightmare.
You know, I just wanted to add that it was really interesting to hear Emma say how you're even in the early formation of the dates for a tour, you may be in touch with a bus company or a trucking company. To a TM, if I know that you had already hit up Beat the Street about that like months ago and they had seen the dates, like right there, put it on hold, you know, because like that I could have lost 2-3 months until it ever came to my desk to make that call. So that's really interesting, right? That the conversation may have been there, and you know, and buses are so hard to get nowadays, so it's like really interesting and maybe very valuable to know if your agent had already spoken to a bus company, huh?
Yeah, I mean, of
Yeah.
course, we're not in a position to put holds on them.
No, but it's like
What I would say to every single tour manager on this webinar right now is put your buses and trucks on hold for 2022 right now. Because I was going through with a promoter earlier today, the stadium shows that are all held for sort of May, June, July, just in the UK, and every weekend, pretty much every stadium has an artist in it. And as we went through it, I'm like, well, there won't be enough buses and trucks to actually do this, particularly if you think that possibly some companies are going to go under because of COVID, and you know, or maybe buy some buses and trucks as those companies go under, because everyone's going to need them in 22, assuming that these tours happen. I mean, it's crazy. Literally, you can't, if you're not holding stuff now, you may need to think about 23 for your tour in the stadium world.
I have a quick example of what when you mentioned, Henry, when you mentioned sports teams there, of what that looks like in the real world for a TM. Last year, we had a nearly sold out arena show up here in Canada, and we were less than a week out from the show, and we were suddenly told, hey, if this hockey team wins their playoff game, they will take your spot next week. Less than a week out from a show that had sold 12,000 tickets. And we're like, surely that can't be the case. Well, you know, so we got into the situation where members of our crew who are Maple Leafs fans were kind of rooting for the Leafs, but kind of not rooting for the Leafs as well, because they didn't want to have to move the show to another date or another arena. You know, that was less than a week out from the show. So that was, you know, that's how crazy it can be with even a show of that size, because those are those sports teams' home ground, their home arenas. So yeah, over to you, Jim.
Oh, you're muted.
Jim, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
There you go. Marlene, how important is it to have relationships with promoters and working with the same promoters over and over again? Is that something that you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, you do get a certain comfort level with certain promoters, but I think it behooves all of us to try to keep it as open as possible. So if an act has history with certain promoters, of course, we usually go back to them first, and unless something happens. And there are the people that you invariably go back to because you guys know how to work together. They understand the client, for example, if there is history. So, you know, yeah, historically we will go back, but I think nowadays it's important to keep all your options open. There's a lot of new players cropping up, especially after this. Hopefully the COVID is over and we're back to business. I think there's going to be new players. So I think it's important to work with both. Sorry. Got a frog in my throat. So, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I did. Yes, thank you. We're trying to think where we are here now.
Yeah, you're.
Well, we kind of just already touched on the science of booking a tour. We covered on how we route it, and that's based on the venue availability and where the artist wants to go. And you're right. You know, I just wanted to add a point that like a lot of the times, like if the tour is booked on sort of, maybe I consider them anchor dates. Like they want to hit the Madison Square Garden on a certain date, maybe around a release day, or they want to play a hometown show on their birthday or something crazy like that. And that tends to be sort of like the points that you have to send it around. And I was curious of when you're starting with an artist, say it's a newer artist that maybe doesn't know how many nights in a row they can do, or a younger manager that doesn't know the business as well as you all. How do you go about finding the parameters in which an artist is comfortable, of how many nights they can sing, or what they're comfortable with?
I don't think you have to push them to start with, obviously, because you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's got to start with comfort level, I think. And it's got to be a discussion, like an open discussion from the start. And I don't know, I like to include artists in these conversations, not just the managers.
It's
but
funny,
that's
they
me.
sort of need to go through it themselves. Like, I had an artist recently that did 3 nights at Brixton Academy, and that artist figured out, that was the first time that he had done multiple nights, and he figured out the first time that he was never going to do 3 nights back to back to back again. And he's like, this was a bad idea. And then it was like, well, I should change up the show then, because if people are coming back for multiple nights, we want to give them a better experience. And then, when things are time coded, that really fucks with the show. So it's an interesting sort of game we all play, right? But if you have a manager that that maybe doesn't agree with something that you are recommending, or is asking for a certain amount of dates, or a routing that that you don't agree with, how do you manage that?
Carefully. I mean, all you can do is recommend things and caution against things. And ultimately, it's up to them if they choose to accept it or not. And sometimes the proof's in the pudding once it's already happened, and then they come back and say, oh, yeah, you were right, that we should have done it. So that's my experience.
Like that. Proof is in the pudding.
I think, we have the benefit of, emails are easy to send. So at least, while, we shouldn't all be just arse covering all the time, we can always put something when we send the tour over saying, as requested, here you're doing 5 in a row, or, you're doing 6 shows a week. I think it might be pushing it a little bit. Here's an alternative that's just a little bit looser. Could you think about it? One of the things, we're sitting here talking about ideal routing, and the reality is that you've got the venue issues with holds, but also you've got financial constraints, that every day that an artist is on the road and isn't playing a show, they're still paying everybody. They're still paying for the trucks, they're paying for the buses, they're paying hotels, they're paying all the crew, the band wages, PDs, all the rest of it. And so you have to try and get the level right between not killing everybody, but also making sure that that extra day off every week isn't killing the tour financially. And I think sometimes we also, as agents, have to actually remember what it's like being a crew person on a tour, because it's a very, very different experience to being the band on the tour. So the band, the artist, whoever is, even at the lowest level, generally has someone looking after them, and they are slightly more mollycoddled. The crew guys are the ones that are there loading out at 2 in the morning and loading back in at 7 in the morning. And occasionally I've had conversations with managers going, I know this is feasible, but look at all of these back-to-backs. By the end of that 5-day run, your crew will be on their knees. And, when we're all in a time where we should be looking at mental health issues, and, we don't want, there's a reason why people go and get drug addictions. And it's not because they're out partying all the time, it's because it's the only way they can stay awake. So, I don't mean to, sound flippant about it. It's really serious, that I think we have to think about those people as well as what it's like for the band.
But thinking about budgeting, would you suggest that when a tour manager is putting together their budget for a tour, that when they get it, they break it down by week. Is that something that would be helpful for agents to see?
Absolutely.
I do that, but I've always been curious about that, if it's helpful for you in booking.
Yeah, I think more information, the better, really.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about the fact that apparently a tour manager or a tour accountant can't do a budget for a tour without knowing what the guarantees are. Because as far as I'm concerned, the costs are not related to the guarantees. And I think it's a really bad habit that people get into where, I mean, the amount of times I've had this conversation with the manager going, why can you not tell me how much this tour costs to do? Because it could be we're completely wasting our time. And I sometimes think that, you know, band, ultimately it all lies with the band. We're all working for the artist. But when the artist knows that there's $100,000, they manage to spend $100,000. And if there's $50,000, they'll spend $50,000. So by not telling somebody, maybe you can get a more realistic budget, which then when you know, put the money in on top, that's fantastic. You know, I know how much it costs for me to drive to Glasgow. If someone pays me more than that, I make a profit. If someone pays me double what it costs, it's not going to cost me double to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think it's a strange thing in our business that we'd be better off doing budgets before we see what the income is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we're waiting to see the guarantee so we have the roadmap of knowing where we need to cut production, but thinking about it in reverse, that makes sense. Like you said, it's like, well, if this is how much it's going to cost you to do a tour, then you know what you're looking at, and maybe we'll make some extra money off of that.
Promo budget where, you know, if it's a promo gig, or like let's put together the ABC cost of it, knowing that we're not getting guarantee back. It's a different way of looking at the formula.
Yeah. I wanted to just circle back really quick on what you said there, Emma, about considering crew working conditions. And that's great for us to hear that agents are considering those things, because we exist in such a cowboy, unregulated environment. And there's a bravado and a pride in making the show happen at all costs. I saw Larry's comment in the chat about landing in Tokyo on Monday, playing Tokyo Dome on Tuesday, and playing Osaka on Wednesday. And that's a real thing, you know, in our industry. People will break themselves to make the show happen because that's just accepted. I think if our crews were subject to the kind of working conditions and overtime that, you know, union crews were, touring budgets would be even in an even worse place than they are. So that's great for us to hear that people are bearing that in mind, because one of the most common complaints from crew is, you know, oh, is the agent just throwing darts at a board out there? You know, when a curious routing comes in, or you know, and they don't see the other side of it. They don't see the consideration that you as agents are putting into the routing and the challenges that you face in making it actually happen.
So I mean, it doesn't mean we necessarily get it right all the time. And again, it's not us that takes the decision a lot of the time. But I think it's just about thinking about it. And sometimes even moving a show by one day can massively improve your quality of life.
Sure.
You know, I don't want people dropping out of the ceiling.
Doesn't that come collaborative though, and try and include as many voices in the process?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess that brings me neatly on to what I was going to bring into conversation here, his communication. You know, you guys are working from an office in London or in LA or in Nashville, wherever the agency is based. We're on the road with the artist and with the crew. The management is in a different office somewhere. It's really easy to, when it's getting busy on tour, when maybe there's an issue arises, to sling mud off in the direction of the person who's not present and, you know, blame the routing or blame something else. But as a tour manager, you're in that environment, but you also have to interface daily with the management and with the agent. So I'm interested in knowing from you what feedback you like to, you know, like we've said many times on this panel, besides the day-to-day manager or the manager, your agent or your agent's assistant is going to be your most, you know, there, as well as your travel agent, those three people are going to be on the end of the phone for you the most, or you know, in your inbox every day. So Marlene, starting with you, how much do you like to hear from your tour manager? Do you like to get feedback on how the shows have been going, if there's been any issues, or do you just kind of work off the assumption that no news is good news?
I mean, in some cases that's true. On the Sweetener tour last year with Ariana, it was a really long, extensive tour, and it took a lot of work. But I really don't think it would have happened if I didn't have a partner with the tour manager, Rashad. He kept me in the loop on everything, good and bad, and he was a key to keeping it together. So I think in most cases, I don't want to just hear, oh, here's the settlement and that's it. I think it's best to know this didn't work, this worked, you know, whatever the feedback is, I think it's good to have. Mm-hmm. So it was key for that.
And Emma, turning the question over to you, we actually, in a much earlier episode, had a discussion internally about how often, you know, sending show reports to management and agents. And we had differing views on how much information to share, or whether that's even essential to begin with. I like to send a nightly or weekly report just with a couple of sentences on how the show was, how the venue was, how the promoter was. Even if it seems banal at the time, you know, for me, it's almost something that I can refer back to if I'm going back to that venue. I'd be interested in getting your take on that and whether it's valuable to you.
Yeah, I think look, all information is good information. Information is power. That's what we all want. And, you know, as Marlene said, if I hear nothing for an entire tour, then I question quite what was happening, because that's quite worrying to me. But I will have made a phone call before that happens going, is everything okay? You know, have you got what you want? I think, you know, there's nothing more frustrating, I think, for an agent than not getting settlements as fast as you can. I really find that winds me up no end. And I think it's really about the highs and the lows, the really goods and the really bads that you particularly want to hear about. The averages, you know, life is a bit average, isn't it? That's good enough. But it's always great, I think, to know, you know, who did a fantastic job, who let you down. You know, I think everything's different as well. So it's always good, I think, on festivals to know how you were looked after. I mean, you know, back to the crew thing, I now, on every confirmation I send for a festival, ask for 2 meal tickets per person, because I'm sick to death of them only giving everybody 1 meal ticket when you arrived at 8 in the morning, you can't leave site, and you're there until midnight. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. And a meal ticket costs nothing. So I think knowing that you got properly looked after is really important. You know, the weather I'm never quite so worried about. I know lots of reports have the weather on it. You know, I generally just get jealous because it was probably sunnier than where I was. But it's useful if you want to explain whether a walk-up was big or not big. But I think as well, it comes down to getting feedback during the advance as well. And something that I mentioned yesterday was, what I want is, if as a tour manager or a production manager, you're advancing a show and you hear something that you don't like, or someone tells you that you're not going to be able to do this thing because of another act, whatever it is, come and tell me. Tell the agent, because I'm the person that put you there in the first place. I'm the person that did the deal. And a lot of the time, you know, if they are saying you're only going to get 1 meal ticket, as I will go in and I will fight. Now, whether I win or not, who knows? But I will fight for you happily. And the manager never needs to know about some of these things. I think that our jobs as behind the scenes people is to make everyone else's life easy. So the band shouldn't know there was a problem. Half the time the manager shouldn't. And it does wind me up sometimes when, you know, I get a call from a tour manager or a production manager saying, you know, this is a problem. And 2 minutes later, I get a manager who doesn't understand anything about it, kicking off, telling me what a catastrophe it is. Whereas 24 hours later, it's all sorted out. But there's always in the back of the manager's mind or the artist's mind, there was a problem with it. And it wasn't a problem. It was just something that needed dealing with. So,
Right.
you know, as much, I don't want to know that if everything's fine, that's great, because we've all done a good job. We've got a good promoter rep, you're doing a good job. But when there is an issue, if it's something that an agent can deal with, then bring it to the agent. That's our job, is to deal with it and help you.
So you've actually answered my question in advance, which is great. But I think
that's what agents do. We think about the answers before you've asked the question.
But that's such a great point, and it's so appropriate for new tour managers to know, because you're an agent, you have the power to potentially not bring your artist back to that promoter, venue, festival. You have much greater bargaining power than me as a tour manager. So if I can't resolve an issue within the means that I have through dialogue with the production, then of course, you know, it gets handed up the line, if it's a serious issue, to the agent, who hopefully can resolve it. And you know, that's why it's important to not go burning bridges before you've crossed them, because the agent may and very well may be able to resolve that issue with a quick call to the superior of the person that you've been dealing with. That oftentimes is the case. You know, you'll be advancing with a promoter, call the agent will call the promoter who booked the show, and all of a sudden it's resolved within 20 minutes, and you know, everyone's happy. So I think that's such an important point to note, because when you're new as a tour manager, it's hard, or for me at least, I didn't want to bother the agent, because the agent always seems incredibly busy and has multiple artists, of which you are one. But ultimately, it's a collaborative effort, right?
We're a team.
Yeah, you're right, Doug. That's a good point for our students, because I remember being a young TM and scared to hit up the agent for some things, because I felt like it was saying that I couldn't handle it myself. And that was the wrong mentality to have, and realizing that it really was a team effort. And you're right. You did the deal. You talk to these promoters a lot more often than I do as well. Like, the relationships are there. And so to use that and to not be afraid to talk to the agent kind of first, if it has to deal with one of those problems with the deal or in the advance. There's different problems maybe that you want to take to the manager versus the agent. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask.
I think as well, where agents can help tour managers and production managers is sometimes you are asked for things that are ridiculous. So if you've got an act that sold 1,000 tickets and they're insisting that their rider needs to be 3 bottles of Cristal, 6 bottles of Crown Royal, 27 plates of smoked salmon, actually you're stuck in a position where that's really hard for you. You're never going to get it. So bring the agent in, because certainly I will. I'm more than happy to say to a manager, are you absolutely on crack? Of course you're not going to get this. It's completely unreasonable. It's not even physically possible to drink it all because you're a solo artist. You know, and so I think we will also have a conversation to calm managers down, because our job is negotiating. That's what we do, and we can negotiate from both sides. So I've just noticed a comment saying about how you end up paying for everything on your rider, which is so true. Obviously, a festival you don't, so get as much as you can. But on a headline tour based on a percentage, it is, I think it's really important to explain to artists that the money is not the promoter's money. And I've done that. And I mean, I remember having a conversation with Chad Smith from the Chili Peppers. We were out for lunch, and I decided I was going to approach the £2,000 a day plant bill. When I say plant, I don't mean generators. I mean physical green plants that do carbon dioxide and shit like that. We were spending all this money every day, and then they just got left. You know, we didn't open a garden center or anything. And it was interesting how after a conversation where I sort of pointed out that probably $50,000 had been spent on stuff that they didn't even notice, suddenly the plants disappeared. There was no greenery. And sometimes they just don't know. Artists don't know. Sometimes managers don't know. So the fact that occasionally there's that little quiet moment, you know, use your agent to try and do that, because sometimes it's harder. It's harder for managers, it's harder for tour managers because you're seeing them more. So I think, you know, use this as much as you can, and you'll figure out the agents that are going to be helpful and the ones that make it worse for you. And if not, Marlene and I have got a list, we can tell you.
Or price.
Well, Marlene, I have a question that I'd like to present to both you and Emma, but I'll start with you first. Especially for up and coming tour managers, what would you like for them to know about working with an agent?
Well, I think it goes back to what we've just been saying and what Henry reiterated, is that it's okay and you should communicate as much as possible. We're supposed to be on the same team. We're not supposed to be adversaries. You know, we are trying to work towards a successful tour. So I think never to be afraid to bring up whatever, to speak up and know that we're on your side.
And what about you, Emma?
I think we've pretty much covered it. I think. Can't remember if there's something else I'm supposed to say at this point.
No.
Or any words of wisdom, but it's really, it's using us, you know, we know stuff, you know stuff. I have no problem ringing a tour manager going, is this a terrible idea or is it a good idea? You know, I've got friendly tour managers that we've worked with over the years that I jump for joy when I see that they're on a tour, you know, in the same way that they will ring me and ask me a question. You know, I may have stayed in a hotel that you haven't stayed in. Let's have that discussion. You know, as Marlene says, we're all on the same team. We're all working for our client who is the artist. We all want that experience to be as good as possible for them. But similarly, we need to make it a good experience for the promoters as well. Because if you don't leave a promoter, you can leave a promoter who's lost an absolute fortune on the show, but they're still thanking you when you leave. Or you can leave them and literally the moment that your back is turned, they're effing and blinding about you, saying they'll never give you another gig. So I think realizing that everyone should be treated with, you know, respect and dignity, doing that, that's really important. And asking questions, being humble, accepting when you're wrong, all of those things are important.
All really great things, and we've been touching on that throughout all of our webinars over the past couple of months, that it's all about the relationships and the teamwork and communication, and that it is all about the experience, and that's a 360 deal for everybody. Everyone's got to be happy, and we're working to kind of make that happen. To kind of break off that, I would like to touch with y'all on mentorship. Can you start, maybe Emma, and roll into Marlene on y'all's mentors and the importance of mentorship on y'all's side?
I mean, I think when I got a job, I don't know whether there's ever been someone all the way through my career that I would say mentored me. But when Ian Flukes gave me a job, he then gave me the opportunity to sink or swim. You know, he gave me enough rope to hang myself, basically. And I think that was really useful. You know, he gave me the ability to give it a go and try it. Was he there constantly saying, do this, don't do that? No, not necessarily. But I think he put me in positions that meant I could learn and do my thing. And through that, you know, I've got so many friends. You know, Mike Greek and I started around the same time, and we've almost mentored each other. So while we didn't know any more than each other, actually being able to talk to somebody, to run ideas up the flagpole, to go, you know, is this completely crazy? We do it now. We do it all the time. It's really important. It's really, really important. So, you know, that's how I feel. I didn't have an obvious mentor, but being given a job and not having to worry that it was going to be taken away from me for some time was really great.
I feel like mentors in the business have evolved. When I started, I had two people who helped me, but they were not hand-holding. They kind of threw me in like perhaps Ian did, and that's sort of the way you learn, trial by fire. I had Kara Lewis, who I met at William Morris, and Chris Dalston, who I worked for as his assistant and who became my husband. But anyways, we've worked together for a long time, and I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do from both of them. And I think mentorship now is different. I'm on the She Is the Music committee for mentoring. And I feel like it's incumbent on us now to actually really be more instructors, which is what I didn't have when I was growing up. But we've been through this business for a long time. The business has changed so much. And I think there's a lot that we've learned from our experiences that, not directives, but we kind of, there's rules kind of set up now. It was a little bit more wild, wild west back then. And I think I'd like to be thought of as a mentor at this point, and I've been trying to do that. So I don't know if I think I'm not answering this question properly.
No, it's great to hear the
Yeah.
the evolution of mentoring. I mean, this is why we started this channel, is what you're saying, because we wanted to teach and these skills, because it didn't exist before. All of us here are self-taught on the road, and we felt that the industry and the culture needed to change around that. And so, I mean, that's why we've asked you guys here today, because we had so many questions from our students. And as you see, we have tons of questions going on now. So I think MJ wanted to cover, was going to cover a few of the Q&A session that we had going here.
Yeah, I have, well, there's a couple that were from the chat. This one from Tiana Rymist Carter that goes along with what we've been speaking about with mentoring, which is, do you have any advice for young aspiring agents and tour managers on how to use this time while everything's on pause and there's hiring freezes? I mean, obviously we're doing this, but do you guys have any other suggestions that we may not have thought about?
That's an interesting question.
Drinking wine, I think, is an excellent
Yeah, well,
I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, but you know, there is, it's hard because it is kind of hands-on business.
Yeah.
And so missing that component makes it really tough. But there are things like this. There's a lot of information that's available. I think more so now because we're all virtual. So I think it's taking advantage of that. And if there's any programs that you can sign up for, as I said, we have She Is the Music. There's, I think BB Rexa has her own organization. And this is for women, but I think as much education and investigating during this time, since you have the time, get a degree. I don't know, you know.
Yeah, I may be doing that.
I think Marlene's absolutely spot on, and I think as well, you don't have to be completely focused on music business 101, because what people want is interesting people around them as well. So you know what, if you're a tour manager, why don't you find out more about artworks in museums in the places you're likely to go, or even figure out those things, put together your day sheet so that actually the next time you're in Amsterdam, you've got a list of 6 things to suggest, as opposed to just telling them what time lobby call is. And some people already do that, but if you've got it and you can have it just in a file on your laptop, then things like that, because they're going to give you a point of difference to everybody else as well. Things like that, learning how you're even better at, go and do a course on how to really work that Excel spreadsheet so that you're a genius at it.
We're all doing that.
There you go.
When I learned how that sum function worked, it was an absolute, no brainer for me. And I can alphabetize things. I can't say the word, but I can do it. I think stuff like that, some of the great tour managers I know, they're just brilliant people. And actually using this time to extend your knowledge, your general knowledge, stuff that you know about, is as important as watching Supermensch or, things like that.
I think
Because
also
it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard at the moment. It's hard to be motivated. It's hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel. So maybe finding something else, giving yourself other interests, is also a good idea.
Yeah, I think something too is that usually we're all on tour or working on events and something, and this has been a great time to connect, not just with like mentors, but with peers. And it's like, because usually everybody's too busy to consistently stay in touch. So I'm finding that's a great help for me, and it's giving me some structure, a little mentoring, and I have way more time to, review people's resumes and, so that's been sort of a bonus,
Yeah.
when we finally need them.
We're isolated, but we're connecting.
Yes, exactly. And then there was another one that I thought was interesting from Lisa Boland. She says, how does pay work when an artist is split between different agents across continents? It's
Pretty simple. I mean,
whatever. Right?
Yeah, whoever booked whatever shows commissions those shows. So we don't split commissions.
Yeah. Does anybody else have do any of you guys have any more questions? Looking what's here in the Q&A.
I thought there was an interesting question just about whether, because managers and agents get paid on commission, whether tour managers should be paid on commission.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
And I think with that, you take the rough with the smooth. I mean, I have production managers and tour managers that generally were already retained for tours this summer that were doing work, got paid on them. We've got paid nothing. So, if you're on commission when the show doesn't happen, you don't get paid anything. So that it's, it's rough with the smooth, I think, a little bit. Is that good? Is that bad? Who knows? I suspect that it's a long way off, unless you literally are a tour manager who is almost part of the management company anyway.
Yeah.
Then I think tour managers will be salaried positions. But as I say, the upside is that you do get paid for whatever work you've done, even if the show doesn't happen.
Good point.
I have a quick question actually that just came to me. One thing that has been relatively constant throughout my career in dealing with artists is the consideration of a new artist, whether they're signing with an agent or a manager, is that consideration between going with a big name who has a big roster with some, large artists, and maybe a new up and coming agent. Let's just put it in the context of an agent, for example. And the thought process being of considering between maybe having the punch of a big name, but on the other hand, maybe getting lost a little bit on their roster if they're a new artist, if they're trying to build their career. Do you have any thoughts from the agent side on that sort of decision for an artist to make, whether to go for a young up and coming agent who might be able to give it all their energy, but may not have the clout that a bigger, more established agent may have?
Do you want to go?
And I guess as an extension of the question, does that factor into your thinking when you're, for example, if you're a more established agent, can you pair with somebody else to work the earlier part of the artist's career and then maybe pick up the slack if things start really blowing up? Is that a consideration? Does that happen?
It happens all the time. In fact, I think it happens more with Emma and her team than it does with us in the US. But I think you're right. There's two sides of it, because obviously when you go with a bigger agent, they have more leverage, but then you have the issue of, do they have time, right? So a lot of times we try to address that by pairing up with a younger agent. So you get the team, which is what Emma referenced earlier with, I forgot what actor, was it Texas? So I think that's the best of both worlds, where you can get that, you have leverage and a younger person with a little bit more time, and that they work together. So that would be the perfect scenario, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's certainly what we try and do as a business. And what we want, though, is that younger agent is with the artist all the way through, because in the same way as, 25 years ago when Marlene and I were young children frolicking in the fields and also signing artists, we've grown up with them. So, be it Beck or Live or whoever, I've always booked Live. And, up to the point where they were selling out multiple arenas in Australia, South Africa. And that's really special. And I think what's really important and incumbent on us, we've just talked about mentorship. Mentorship, I think sometimes it gets talked about too much, and actually it's about doing it and not saying you're doing it, but just getting on with it. So in a way, I'd like to think that, Marlene, myself, Chris, Nigel Hasler, all of the guys, all of us that have been around a bit longer are mentoring the agents that are newer to the game, however old they are, because we're there for them and we're helping them through. But it's not the intention at all that as soon as they can sell out an arena, that person's pushed to the side and we're doing it. The idea is that the whole way through, they're owning the process and we're able to, give guidance, make suggestions, be in the background, be in the foreground, but still keep that other person involved. And that's how I think we've got a whole raft. I mean, if I look in our office, people like Andy Cook and Summer Marshall and Mark Newey, and there's plenty of others that have worked up through the ranks, and they're now out there booking arena tours. Andy looks after this guy, Jerry Cinnamon, who sold out Hampden in a day in Edinburgh. I'm sure there's lots of people on here that have never even heard of him. He signed him, he's done it, but he has the benefit of the other guys at CAA. So he can always ask a question. He can always look at a settlement, and that to me is mentorship as much as anything else. It's being there for everybody.
Yeah, he was the fastest to sell out Hampden in history, right? I'm from Glasgow and I'd never heard of him. I've been out the country 5 years and I'd never heard of him until my brother who worked that show told me about it, and it blew my mind.
I only heard of him because of working for DF and so being in that loop, but I hadn't heard of him either.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic thing. I mean, it's a huge shame that the shows haven't happened, but fingers crossed they'll happen next year. And he's got a huge career, but he benefits from having Andy, who's a great agent, and Andy has every person at CAA. If he picks up the phone to me or Marlene or Chris, we'll always give him info. I know who you had on here whenever it was. If you want to understand how a deal works, everybody at CAA, and it doesn't matter who you are and how big a deal you are as an agent, she'll still know more than you. So you may as well ring her up and ask her how to do it.
True.
Yeah, you've already had the brains on. Now you've got us.
So to our students, if you haven't seen that, check out, I think it's episode 23, Ina Jacobs. It was an amazing episode. We love her so much. But I think that's all the questions. Were we covering anything else? There were some questions about the future of touring, and like always on our channel, we just don't want to go into speculation of what the future is going to be like. Who knows yet? But I really enjoyed this one. Thank you, ladies, so much for being on here.
This was incredible. It's such an honor to have you on.
Yeah, it really was. Any closing thoughts? Anyone? No. Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. It was a blast, and have a great week, everybody. We'll see you again on Thursday. So take care. Wash your hands.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.